Good evening, everyone. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Cheryl Shindrak, and I am a member of the Board of Directors of the Canada-Ireland Foundation. And it is my great pleasure to welcome you all to this evening's event entitled Revitalizing Our Languages, Irish and Indigenous Perspectives. Some of you may have joined us earlier this week for Galga 101, an introduction to the Irish language. We hope you enjoyed it, and if you missed it, the video is now available on the Canada-Ireland Foundation YouTube channel, and I do encourage you to check it out. We also look forward to seeing you in person this Sunday afternoon at the Dorkio Irish Pub on the Danforth in Toronto. Our guest list is approaching capacity, so if you'd like to join us, please be sure to register soon on our website or the Eventbrite page. We are delighted to have with us for this evening's program, Dr. Alan Corbiere and Manchán Magan. However, before I introduce our speakers, the Canada-Ireland Foundation wishes to acknowledge that our organization operates on the traditional territory of many Indigenous nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, the Wendat peoples, and the Greater Toronto region is now home to many diverse nations, Inuit and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that the City of Toronto is covered by Treaty 13, signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Williams Treaties, signed with multiple Mississauga and Chippewa bands. We know that many of you are tuning into this evening from other locations, and we invite you now to reflect upon the territory in which you reside and how you derive a living from it. We also invite you to acknowledge the longtime Indigenous proprietors, stewards, treaty holders, as well as the birds, fish, the animals, and spirits therein. So now on to our very special guest this evening. Dr. Alan Corbiere is an Anishinaabe from Shageen First Nation on Manitoulin Island in Ontario. He is currently Canada Research Chair of Indigenous History in North America and Assistant Professor at York University. Previously, Dr. Corbiere served as Executive Director of the Ojibwe Cultural Foundation and Coordinator of the Anishinaabe Moan Revitalization Program at Lakeview School in Shageen First Nation, where he and his co-workers developed a culturally based second language program that focused on using Anishinaabe stories to teach language. Not surprisingly, among Dr. Corbiere's research interests is the revitalization of the Anishinaabe language. Welcome, Dr. Corbiere. I also have the pleasure of introducing our second guest this evening, Mr. Manchán Magan, joining us all the way from his home in Ireland, where I believe the time is now after 11 p.m. Manchán is an award-winning Irish writer and documentary maker. He writes on a regular basis for the Irish Times and presents a podcast entitled The Almanac of Ireland for RTE Radio 1. Manchán has also written, produced, and presented dozens of television documentaries on travel and world cultures. His best-selling book, 32 Words for Field, explores the insights of the Irish language and what it offers into the landscape, the psyche, and the heritage of Ireland. He has just recently published a new illustrated book entitled Tree Dogs, Banshee Fingers, and Other Irish Words for Nature. Welcome, Manchán, and we are thrilled that you are here with Dr. Corbiere, and I shall now turn the floor over to you. And I will ask you to unmute yourself. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cheryl. Thank you for those words, and particularly for reflecting and for highlighting the fact of the territory that all of us are on, territory that wasn't always our own. And just before I even mention anything about the Irish language, I want to say that in no way am I saying that there's any equivalence between the Irish language, which is an Indo-European language, and an actual native Indigenous language. Like the Irish people, well, we might talk about that when I talk about the roots of the Irish language, but they're both very different things. This is a white language, a colonized language that we've been speaking on this island for many thousands, for 2,000 or 3,000 of years, but still wouldn't have the rootedness of an Indigenous language. But maybe because this is the Canadian Ireland Foundation, what I'd love to find out from Alan first, I should give a summary maybe of the Irish language, but before that, as you say, if this week already you were looking at Gaeilge 101, what I'd love to get a sense maybe from Alan is about the roots of Ojibwe, or the Anishinaabe language. Would you be able to do that, Alan?
Well, nana bojo Anishinaabe dok minwa ni jabimadzid ngake migwachwa kundok enki jik noki tongin gik manda maunjedwin. I want to first thank people for tuning in, as well as thank the people who invited me, as well as the ones who worked on this. I did have a PowerPoint that just showed where the distribution of the Anishinaabe language was. And I don't know, I thought that somebody else was, I can share the screen, I guess, eh? Yeah. Are you seeing that?
Yeah.
So I just called this Kwejinita Anishinaabe, and that means he's trying to speak well in Ojibwe. And this is actually from the North Shore, this picture, and it's that bluff in the background is what our reserve is named after, and it's called Michigwedno, and that means the bluff in the shape of the spearhead. And we have a trickster named, or our great uncle named Nanabush, and that's where he dropped that, and that's where our name comes from in there. So I was asked to come up with a description of the languages that we would be talking about, but this is the language families in all of Canada. And I took this from the Canadian Language Museum, which the link is on the bottom. But if you just Google Canadian Language Museum, you'll find this report on Canada's Indigenous languages, and you'll see this map. And it shows the language group and the families. So looking at the families, it looks like there's 1, 2, 3, under 10. But actually, when you get into the actual languages, you'll see that there's a lot more. And for us, what I'm talking about tonight is Ojibwe language, what is commonly called Ojibwe language, but what the speakers call Anishinaabe, and that means the language of the people. And so here, these orange dots in and around the Great Lakes of Ontario, these are people that speak Anishinaabe, and you see it goes out to Saskatchewan here. And there's actually a reserve in Alberta as well. But there are also a lot of different dialects. So the people, I'm from Manitoulin here, which is right in the middle of Lake Huron. And when I speak, people say that I butcher, I mean, they do say that too, but that I actually truncate the language. Our language truncates the language so much that they can't hear us. They can't understand us, that it's too fast what we speak. And that's what I'm given to understand what Ojibwe means. Ojib means it contracts, and we means the language, how they speak. So this was taken from that museum, Canadian Language Museum, but this was an organization, a political organization that we have here in Ontario, and this political organization has 43 members that are called the Union of Ontario Indians. And here, this table just shows how many people actually, based on the 2016 census, reported that they speak an Indigenous language in their home. So on your left, you'll see that there's a number of communities there. The largest one is Wikwamkong, and that actually has the largest population as well. So over there, reported by the census, there's 20% that still speak Anishinaabe in the home. But if you go further down south in Southern Ontario, where there's a greater population of non-Native people, you'll see that 0.6% actually speak Anishinaabe in the home. So here on the left, you see as well these figures that are talking about mother tongue, the ones that spoke as Anishinaabe as their own language when they were growing up. And it was 13.8. But then you see that, 12.6. And then after you see that it goes to 4.2. And the distribution by region, and then it gets lower. But this is the main thing I wanted to show you, is that from this report that was done by the Union of Ontario Indians, which is now also known as Anishinaabe Nation, they looked at these statistics, the Canadian census, and in 1996, 18.9% people in the Ojibwe territory said that they spoke their language, and then 13.7 said they spoke it at home. But now in 2016, you see that 7% say that they speak their language, and at 4.7 actually also say that they speak it at home. So we have a great attrition rate there. And in fact, Ginago, Minuawas Nago, Giwana Ak, Gunda Anishinaabe Nata Anishinaabe. Just yesterday, we lost an elder here on Manitoulin Island who was one of our ceremonial leaders. And it's a big loss. And I'm still kind of thinking about grappling with that. But the day before that, Mankan, you mentioned in our call before this that you had watched Elizabeth Panamic's videos on our website. She passed away the day before yesterday. So we lost another good storyteller and a speaker who spoke Ojibwe first and then learned English subsequently. And then last week, we also lost another one. So in our area, we're losing them faster than we're producing them, is basically where we are at and on the island here. So I just, I believe that I was asked to give a little overview of what our situation is here. So I try to be brief with that. So that's what I wanted to share. Over to you there, Mankan.
Thank you, Alan. What a loss. Like that, it's that palpable that we can just talk of the people we just happened to talk about last week are already gone. And when you talk about that decline from the 18% down to 7%, is that mainly it, that it's elder people and the young people aren't coming up, or is there loads of reasons why that decline is increasing?
There's loads of reasons, but really it is there is no intergenerational transmission. The people are looking to the schools to do it. And just recently, we've had a couple of immersion schools start up, but it's we haven't yet gotten full results of that yet. And it sounds like there's a bit of mixed results. And of course, the pandemic hasn't helped.
Yeah. So how do I give a summary of the Irish language? And first, there's so many different ways of calling it. Like it's Gaelic, as I suppose in linguists would call it the Gaelic language, but for some reason in Ireland, because it's our language, in the same way as Anishinaabe and Anishinaabe Magan is your language, that's what you call it. We call it our language, the Irish language, but the official name, I suppose, is Gaelic. And it's it's one of these Indo-European languages, one of the languages that was set up in those culture that arrived between Europe and Asia, where farming was honed in the Middle East and then spread across Europe. And this language slowly made its way to the margins, to the very margins, the Western periphery, in other words, Ireland and Scotland and North France. And because that was wild land out there, it has remained very pure. Nobody else has tried to invade it or to take over the language. So we, the speakers of this language in Ireland, have been on this island for 4,500 years. We're the Bronze Age people. There were people here before us, the Neolithic people, and then hunter-gatherers. But obviously, we've only been speaking this language for, well, we know it was written down when the Christians came, so in the 6th century. But it looks like we've been speaking for 2,000 years, possibly 3,000 years. Possibly this Celtic or Gaelic movement came across Europe and arrived in Ireland in 800 BC. It's hard to prove that because that's all prehistory. But we've been using that language ever since on this island. And so obviously what happened then was people invaded the island and pushed out our language. So I suppose first Christianity came, was willing to adapt the Irish language, but brought Latin with it and Greek and a new way of seeing the world. That happened in the 5th century with St. Patrick. And then came the Vikings. They again brought a lot of Scandinavian words, but they didn't wipe out our language. Then the Normans came. There was the French English in the 12th century. They brought a bit of French, and particularly French dialect and French pronunciation, but we kept our language. But it was really the English people who decided we're going to wipe out this language. As any great colonial force realized, if you wipe people's languages, you can easily control them more. So they tried that for centuries in different ways. And eventually it was the famine, it was the great, potato hunger of the mid-19th century, of the 1840s, that our people realized our only hope was to learn English so we could go to America, go to Canada, go to Australia, go to England. And so we started abandoning our own language. And at the same time, England set up a national school system that was going to teach us education, primary school education for the first time, but we had to learn English if we were going to go into those schools. So we're now in the situation that Irish as a living language, it's really only in the Gaeltacht areas, and the Gaeltacht means the Irish-speaking areas. And as is in any colonial story, the Irish-speaking areas are the poorest areas, the most wild and exposed and barren, and the areas with the least amount of facilities and money and road infrastructure. But that's where the Irish language was, all along the West Coast. So 25% of the West Coast of Ireland is in a Gaeltacht, an Irish-speaking area. And people know that area because the West Coast is also the most beautiful. Often the remote wild lands are the most beautiful. So tourism comes there, which doesn't help the language, to have a load of American and tourists from all over the world coming, not speaking our language. But even in that Gaeltacht, there's 96,000 people living in the Gaeltacht area, but a third of them don't speak Irish. And those that do speak Irish, probably very few of those speak it daily. So it's often hard. In censuses, a quarter of the population say they can speak Irish, but I've made a TV program and I've done journalism where I've gone out and tried to speak to that, to find that quarter, but it's hard to find.
Right.
So yeah,
right.
So as anything with a language, we're now really proud of the language. We used to be ashamed of it. We thought it was a mark of backwardness. And it's healthier than a lot of other minority languages because we have a government behind it and we have EU recognition for it and we have a TV station and radio station. But at the same time, it's like any language that isn't French or English or Spanish or Chinese, it's deeply threatened. Yeah. And Alan, are you actively doing projects to work on helping support the Irish language? Or sorry, the Ojibwe language, the Anishinaabe?
I don't know if I made clear to the rest of the audience here that when I was growing up, my parents spoke Ojibwe and my grandparents and aunts and uncles, they all spoke to each other every day. My parents spoke every day to each other, but then they talked to my siblings and I, and they spoke in English. And so we grew up and we didn't acquire it in the home. And then we went to school, and when I started school, I remember that at least in grade 3, we did have Ojibwe as a subject, but I didn't leave with any significant or demonstrable communicative competence leaving there. And kind of get back, this reserve was on school. I mean, this school was on the reserve. And what one of the things that the administration introduced was when we turned into grade 6, they said, we're going to try an experiment to get you ready for high school for success. So we're going to teach French, and you're all going to have like switch rooms, whereas they never used to do that. So grade 6, 7, and 8, we're going to switch rooms like high school does. And you're going to go here for French, you're going to go here for math or for gym. And then the teacher said to me at that time, you should take French, you're smart. So basically implying that if you're not smart, take Ojibwe. So that was the unsaid message. But I took Ojibwe, and they ended up abandoning that after a year. And so we had to take French as well as Ojibwe at that time. So I'm actively involved still. I record elders, and I see a lot of activity now. Like when I started out 25 years ago, my wife and I conceived our first child, and that's when I decided I'm going to try and learn to speak, because I realized then my parents and grandparents, all the way back to creation, they spoke Ojibwe. they spoke Anishinaabe, and it stopped with me. So I could blame them, or I could try and ask them to help me and to start to try and turn things around. Anyway, it was more difficult task than I had anticipated, and I couldn't do it, especially then when I had children. So I was too slow picking it up, I say. And but what I did decide though was, if I'm not going to become fully fluent, at least I'll make a bunch of resources where I've recorded elders and I've written out as best that I can, and then I get my mentor Marianne Corbiere to overlook those. And I also have an elder, Evelyn Roy, who helps me. She's literate and fluent as well. And then we put out these different videos, and one of them, uh, uh, the one with Elizabeth Panamick, that was a project done in 2002 to 2004. And then later on, I did another project with the Ojibwe Culture Foundation where I was worked. And then when I worked at Lakeview School 2011 to 2016, we recorded even more elders. And the big interest now, or the shift, is to actually make land-based activities. And so we wanted to do a different uh, record different sessions where people are actually actively involved on doing land-based activities like harvesting or hunting deer, or pulling a net, or setting a net, or picking sweetgrass. So that's what our on the chiging.ca, that Chiging is our First Nation, and you go to chiging.ca, there'll be a Anishinaabe tab, and then when you that drop-down tab will show a bunch of videos, and they're categorized by historical tales, customs and practices, and medicines and plants. So I was trying to get people that would be interested in those. But what I find right now is that you look on Facebook or on YouTube, and a lot of the people are more interested in words rather than whole stories. And the whole stories, I think, are too much for people to handle right now. And the other thing I think that's happening is, I feel personally, I feel like we're stuck at the starting gate still, and we haven't really opened the gates and let people out, because we're still talking about words and teaching about your names and clans and numbers and colors, but then we have these whole full narratives, and we don't know how we're going to link in between the two, from point A to point B. So when I got the job at Lakeview as a project coordinator for that, I started saying, well, okay, we want the students to learn these stories, because these stories are what are important to our identity and to our tenure and culture, tenure to the land, stewardship to the land, and to our culture for future generations and past generations. So if these stories are the ones we want to focus on, then I started thinking, okay, I'll record the stories, we'll put them up, and then I'll analyze them. So I had worked with a linguist named Dustin Bowers, and then he was doing his PhD out at the University of Alberta, and he made a parser. And I said, okay, if you're able to, put all these in, and we'll see what are the most frequently taught, or what are the most frequent words in these stories, and we'll teach those. And then what are also the most frequently used grammatical structures and forms, and then we'll focus on those. And then, so I felt like I'm cheating, like I'm making, the goal is here, and then we're over here, and then I'm tearing this apart, and I'm saying, here's how you're going to get here. And anyway, I found out from teachers, I'm not a trained teacher. They said, oh, that's backwards buildup. And I didn't know that that's actually a technique. So that was what we were trying to do. But then, of course, we ran out of funding, as a lot of these projects do. And I don't know if you mentioned that your government is able to administer funds for your initiatives. In Canada, they have to do it for 633 different First Nations. So in the end, these programs that get funded, in the past, in the 2000s, they had a program called Aboriginal Languages Initiative Fund. And what was happening was people were applying for it, and they'd only get $5,000. So you wouldn't get anywhere with that. So we need a significant amount of capital investment as well as human resource investment in order to get over that hump and to start really producing speakers, first language speakers. But that's that's kind of where we are with and the projects are, I feel like it's, I'm better able to assist in making resources that the elders are talking about now. And so I, I usually talk about that our program should be preservation, maintenance, and revitalization. So I've actually been involved with a lot of preservation, and that's recording elders and working with those elders and writing out, making an accurate record. Maintenance is actually talking amongst yourselves, like what you said, where the people are hanging out, and then that's where you actually go and speak and you maintain your language. But revitalizing it is like what I was talking about, what's happening on Twitter and Facebook, where a lot of people are learning, and even speakers now. 20 years ago, 25 years ago, a lot of the speakers used to tell me, don't write it. Our language has never been written. Don't write, you can't do that. Don't write it. Now, some of those people that said that to me, they're actually on Facebook, they're older people, and they're trying to write in Ojibwe on Facebook. So it's times change, and the tools that we have at our disposal. When I started out, we didn't have all of these resources that we do have now. And so there's a lot of exciting initiatives that different people are doing. But I think if all this stuff was there now that we have now, when I started, I think I'd be fluent. Or if I started earlier, before I had children, was the other thing, maybe.
And Alan, what I'd love to do is to watch one of these resources that you made available. So I see Amy Heinen has put a link to your website, but I'll put another one here to the videos themselves. But we might, William or Richard might just play a little bit of one of the videos that you recorded.
We the Michigan or the we dog where coming we she was going on me man the one casiam tick it is man the chicken get good up no mon pim kick McQuay get good up mine of the sema we saw na you should get good up no mon kick McQuay yeah. Kaya ko the benzina, my peking. Kaya ko the dangena. With the shop deck sema we sign, we each bunang, my boy up nine, we the kita wing my boom tick, or there was it again, we she boss again. My fish was sasema.
Okay, if we could just stop there. So what I had, what he's saying there is, what he was saying there is that he cut those 2 trees he's holding right now. And that was, he said, before we do anything, we always put tobacco down. We offer our tobacco for Mother Earth, he said. Because what we don't own anything, he says. He says we only borrow it. And so he said, I have to ask in order to take these trees, in order to make what we're going to do so that we are able to eat. So here's where he's going to set up, he cut those trees down, and he's going to show how he actually would set the net here. Okay.
Ano na kasin, mapisap kat ko na. Na bingito ni sap. We can it sap come banan. Click binayer and the sabim. Yeah, but the sweet sat. Man the kashit yeah. مش من ما بجسد مش غد وباب ست وباب تاكشن شنو يا Daga man tingong sat skido. Yeah.
So he said with that first one that's sticking out, he says you're going to tie the net to the bottom of that pole, and then you stick it in, and then that one that's crossed is what keeps it out, so that you just pull that out. And then that cedar tree acts as a sign to anybody going by on skidoos not to go by there because they get into an accident. So this is what he's talking about, setting the net under the ice. On the website where this actually is, there's a transcript, and my feeling before was that we should just have monolingual transcripts, and then we put a glossary. So my idea was that if adults are learning this, then their homework is to work through and translate it on their own with the facilitation of a teacher there. And so that then they're putting an effort to learn the language and to use it. And then the other thing with the transcript was that then we start to have our own literature after. People can read exercises in the school, use that for exercise sheets, whatever, crossword puzzles or word finds or whatever, what have you, or even just making the story about themselves instead of an instructional one. So that was the idea of using the glossaries and the monolingual text without the translation. Anyway, I used to teach these adults, and I was telling them that I said, no, I'm not going to put a translation there because I don't want to spoon feed you this. Anyway, my class says to me, we want the spoon. We want the spoon. So, so anyway, some of the stories you'll see, some of the stories on that website have both the Ojibwe transcription, Anishinaabe transcription, and the English translation and the glossary. So that was where as far as we got, but I wanted to populate it more to actually get in even more materials in there that become the basis for the curriculum, as well as anybody who is also geared to independent self-learners who want to see and learn. You can go on YouTube and you can hear these videos, not these videos, but you will hear different videos where different speakers are telling different teachings. But if you're a beginner and you're listening to a video in a different language, it all sounds like one word. You don't know where one word ends and the other begins. And then sometimes in our language, we'd say, gi wab me go, or gi wabam go. So if you say go in Ojibwe, that's an emphatic particle. But when I say gi wab me go, I was seen. But sometimes you could get that mixed up with gi wab me go as two different separate words. Anyway, that's the part of actually the goal to me is learning the language that is as spoken at the speed that the elders speak. And that's the high watermark that we were trying to aspire and reach. And so that's why I've been recording these elders and writing out what they say and try and get so that when you watch that, when a student watches that video, they develop an audio and visual sense of the language that then they can utilize when they're on their self-learning journey.
And I noticed in the chat, Fiona Caldwell King says it's what an amazing resource. And it really is. It's really alluring when one gets lost into it. Like I just dropped into it to observe, but because you're not spoon feeding us with full English translations, because there is glossary and there's just a word, then it becomes like a quiz because you try to listen back and see, can you hear that word? It's like, it's exactly what, like we have this language instinct. We like to understand what people are saying. And if we give these little hints along the way, it just becomes a game. It just becomes fun, particularly because we want to understand those activities. That thing you did of realizing that the languages are connected to the activities. And it's interesting, one of the attendees today is a man called Liam O'Kinnigan, who founded Idasquail. Idasquail was vital for the revival of Irish language in the modern age. It's an Irish language school up in Donegal. And so some of our past presidents, as well as like Japanese and American dignitaries, have gone to learn Irish there because he nailed that thing that you did. Rather than having a language separate, where it's just an academic thing in school, if you connect it with activities. So up in Donegal, in the wild wests of Idasquail, they will learn the language, but they will also be doing weaving days or looking out at archaeological features in the mountains or just listening to traditional music.
Mm-hmm.
And that idea, once we connect a language to a place and to activities, it somehow comes alive in a stronger way. And as part of that, I did a project last year for Galway 20. Galway was the European City of Culture in 2020. And so I wanted to look at coastal words that were connected, that the fishermen would have had along that western coast, realizing again that these fishermen have been fishing in the same ways. You know, we use this. I once made a documentary looking at the traditional boat in Ireland, the currach or the naveog. It's a calf-skinned, light wooden craft. Now they're using tar instead of canvas and tar instead of leather. And the thin, light wood was because there was no trees by this stage living on the Atlantic Ocean. We had cut down all our trees. So it was only whatever they were getting like on, was coming as beechcraft, as you know, bits blown up on the shore. And so they made these very light boats that could ride the Atlantic waves. But I brought one up to Greenland to work with Inuit people. And they said it was the same sort of boat, the same idea, you know, a leather skin with a light wooden frame on it. But these fishermen in the Atlantic Ocean have been fishing the same waters for, as I said, 4,000 years, looking at the same coastal elements. And so their language is rooted to that place in a way that is just beyond me and my Dublin city modern way of thinking. So I was collecting words from people there, but a lot of them, there was a word like cunnick, and cunnick means a dangerous churning whirlpool between two strong currents. So it happens between two land masses, and when the water pulls out from both sides, when it is ebbing, there is this drop in the water. And we don't have a word for that in English, but I don't even have a concept for that in English in Ireland. But these people, because they were fishing for so long with light craft, it was vital for them. But a lot of the times I would ask people words and they'd say, oh, I haven't said that word for 40 years or for 50 years. Because why would they? Because when we joined the EU, the government on purpose, you know, they did a deal with the EU in 1973 to allow us to join on provision that we would give away our fishing rights. So, and as I said, 25% were along that Atlantic coastline, the area where where everyone depended on fishing. So all those Irish speakers no longer had a job. All of that knowledge they had about the fishing techniques, the words were no longer useful. There was a lovely word, muirla, and muirla means the act of taking baby crabs, chewing them in your mouth, and then spitting them into sea to act as bait for other fish. Like, they're so specific. So anyway, I recorded a load of these words and put them out on little videos. We don't have time to show it, but on my Instagram, it's exactly as you're saying. There is this new interest in people. If you can digest the core of a language into bite-sized pieces, people will enjoy it. But I'm always aware we're not going to save a language in that way. Is that it's tokenism. I want to say one other thing before I pass over to you. Like, when you said to me about how there's, you know, is it 630 languages, Indigenous languages in Canada that the money is going to, roughly.
That was like, the First Nations, actually.
Ah, right. Okay. Also, yeah, okay. There is more or less languages. There's less. Yeah, but we, you know, in Ireland, we feel so hard done by that we're not getting enough money from the government for the Irish language. And yet, to put that in comparison with your situation, in fact, we're very well funded. We should be giving you some money. It really is this idea that if we're interested in minority languages, it's not about just saving ours. It's about somehow sharing, and particularly if we have more than enough. I always would have thought before this call, I would have thought we don't have enough resources. Talking to you, I realize actually there's languages that are in more need of resources than us. And we have, you know, my great granduncle was one of the founders of the state of the army who fought Britain. The O'Reilly, his name was, and he also set up the Gaelic League, which was the revival of the Irish language. But from then, from 1916 until now, one of the prime ideas of the government was to fund the Irish language, to develop the Irish language. But somehow we didn't learn it. There was a block, a psychological block. No matter how many resources were put in our way, we wouldn't learn. So sometimes money isn't the answer.
Yeah, that's too true. You got to find the motivation for it, and then after a while, when you're learning it as an adult or as a teenager, sometimes it can be very hard and difficult, and then it just sometimes it wears on people and they give up. It used to be sometimes I guess I would call it worse. It used to be worse. I think now people are changing. Where what I mean saying it was worse was there was a lot of ridicule. If we said something wrong, then we got laughed at, eh? And then also then after if we tried to coin new words or stuff or tried things out, then they would just balk at that. And like I was saying, when I started out, they were saying to me, "You can't write that. Don't write that. It's not a written language. It's an oral language." And what do you think you're doing? That's what they were saying to me back then. But now they're not saying that anymore. And but you're right when you said when you were saying that this isn't how we're going to save the language with these resources. This isn't how it's going to happen. But what I see, like I was on the Facebook there the other day, and I saw a family down south, a woman that I know who's a teacher down south, and she's Ojibwe, and she teaches at a school there, and they had a school day where they actually harvested deer. Somebody had killed a deer and they were skinning a deer. The same uncle who we just showed that video of, on that same site, there's a video of him skinning a deer. So I sent her the link and I said, here's the words that go with it. This is the part where you have to try and start to use the words that are in those stories and to introduce them to the children at the school at that time, because she's not fluent. She has limited resources, and she probably, I don't know how many speakers they have left in that community where she is teaching. But when I was there 15 years ago, there were quite a number of elders that still spoke Ojibwe there. But of course, they're having the same attrition as we do. So they likely weren't using the amount of resources we have to their fullest capacity.
Alan, I'd love to touch upon, so we looked at the idea of that these languages give insights into sustainable ways of being in the land, of working in the land, and of living. The other thing that really struck me when I was trying to show people a new way of looking at the Irish language in that book, in 32 Words of Field, was that the Irish language gives us an understanding of the spiritual world that's very unique. And so as I said, in the 5th century, Christianity came, a patriarchal form of Christianity came on top of the animistic, the spiritual belief that would have been in Ireland, the pagan belief, worshipping beings or animal, sacred spirit forces in nature. But so much of that pre-Christian concept is still in the Irish language. And I often describe the one good way of seeing it is the word counter and alter. So counter means this district or a place or a region. And the opposite of counter, you'll still find it in the dictionaries, but people don't say it because obviously the Christian church didn't like it. The opposite of counter is alter. And alter means the other world, the nether realm, the world beyond. Oh. And so our people always understood that there was counter, there was this region, but just a thin veil away, just beyond, just between us was the other world. Now, obviously, Christians came with another belief and didn't want us, but I could give so many words for that, for Irish words that show that there is this fairy world, this magical other world that we can have access to and communicates with us. But what other insights into other ways of seeing the world would Ojibwe or Anishinaabe give?
We were just like I was telling my elder there, Evelyn Roy, who is helping me with this. She's a devout Christian still, but her father was a fisherman, and he has this he tells this awesome story of who we call a painisak, and those are little people. And he talks about the very first ones when they came into being, and it's an epic story. Like it's long, and then there's a pictograph our ancestors would paint on the cliff faces that abut water, and and it tells the story of that. Anyway, we were also talking about this other story where I wrote down what this elder was talking about, and then she said, in Ojibwe we say nido. Nido means a spirit, and then or a mystery, and then the other thing is people end up saying it's something unfathomable. But then when our language is agglutinative and it's made up of morphemes, and you get more exact or precise descriptions of phenomena or actions when you actually add more onto the word. So one of the words that they would talk about is, so for instance, talking about this fellow that just passed away here that I mentioned, some would say Nido Wadze, that he had a character in his being, lifestyle that was spiritual. It's more than being a spiritual nature, but Nido Wadze, it means more than that. And then Nido We would be just he is a spirit or she is a spirit. And we have this, there's a very permeable border, or if you want to call it a border, between the two, and going back and forth between there. So metamorphosis, and what English called metamorphosis, is a very real thing for us still here, for Anishinaabe people, and that the spirits can show themselves, reveal themselves, and then of course disappear and give you guidance or warning or what have you. So the other word then we were struggling with was this elder was telling this story, and I wrote it out, and then she says Nido Wendalgaze. So it's different than Nido Wadze, but it's Nido Wendalgaze. So Nido is still the first part, meaning the spirit, but Wendalgaze, you could almost just say he is considered a spirit. But actually, when I suggested that to her, she says, no, that's not it. That's not strong enough, what the word is. So we had to actually phone around and find out what other people would think of how would you translate this word in this particular context. So again, it's you could have a number of different ways of talking about the spirit. Nido, you could say Nido We, and that means he or she is a spirit, becomes a spirit. And in Nido Wadze, he has a spiritual character. But Nido Wendalgaze, the people that encounter that person know them to be formidable and even dangerous. So that was in that context. And then the other thing was, we were doing a different story, and another elder was talking about a place, and she says that Nishnabek Tashki Nido Kadana Amanda. They considered this place to be, and I would say in English, but they didn't agree with me. They considered this place to be imbued with the spirit. That's how I translated. And then the elders didn't like, they just didn't think it was adequate enough. So there are things you have to that I have to really work on when translating and understand. I get the sense of what's being said, but translating it into English, sometimes I fall short. Many times I fall short.
Oh, so it's a whole other way of being in the world, of understanding your place and your reality, your philosophy.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So in like the beginning of my uncle's discourse there, when he was talking about Mother Earth, but he called her Shkakamikwe, and that some that break that word down. Kamik, in that word, kamik means of the earth, how the earth is. And so some say Mshkakame, the late author Basil Johnson used to say the strength of the earth, Mshkike for medicine, but Mshke has an overtone sometimes of strength. So, but I'm not too sure if of the etymology of the word. Anyway, so that's who he's addressing. And then the other thing he mentioned in there was, he says, and also those beings in the four directions, but he didn't say four directions. He says, from whence the four winds blow. So again, those are the cardinal directions, but there's cardinal spirits as well. And that's who he's addressing in that prayer there when he puts that tobacco before taking the tree down.
Reminds me of there's an Irish phrase, "On the Kera Harda," from the four directions or from the four heights. It was the idea of that everything comes in one. And like, I live in the Midlands of Ireland. I live in a county called County Westmeath. But that word Meath, Midda, it's from Midda, sort of connected to the middle. But actually, it's the central province. So there was, and the central province wasn't a province, a physical province. It was a province of the mind, a province of energy. So there's the
Right.
4 provinces in Ireland, but they're called Cuigu is the word for the Irish word for a province. But Cuig means 5. So there's 4 provinces, but they're called the 4/5, because the center one was the one that united them all together. The province of the spirit, of the basically the oneness that connects all the 4. But to get an
Right.
English speaker in Ireland to understand that, or to understand that when I'm giving directions in Irish, like in English, you say, oh, I'm going back over the road, or your man is just over there. But in Irish, you don't. If there's a cow, you say, Tom Bosagart here. The cow is in the field to the east. Or Tom Adol Shiro Yasser Malayan to Sira. I'm going southwest on my holidays. You need to orientate yourself to the sun. So you need to be actually rooted in the landscape, not only in the landscape, but connected with this burning star that's at the center of our solar system. So it's a whole wider way. I don't think it's half as wide as the way that you're describing that the Ojibwe language looks at the world, but it is a lot wider than a modern European language would.
Or incidentally, when you mentioned that, talking about the sun, our word for a clock is the Buggeese one. And Gizis is, of course, the sun. And then the Ba means you're measuring it. So measuring the sun, the instrument that measures the sun is basically how they came up with the, must have been a sundial before or something, I don't know.
Oh, beautiful. Yeah. I'm realizing time is going on, and I would love to open this up to the attendees too, to see if they have questions. So
Okay.
we might see if they have questions and devote a few moments to that. Or otherwise, Alan, just while questions are coming in, you touched when we were talking earlier about the idea of family in your language, and that it's.
Oh, yeah.
Would you talk a moment about that? And then maybe if people have questions, they can put them in the chat box.
So when we were, like, again, this comes back to what my Uncle George was talking about when he mentioned Shkakamekwe, Mother Earth. And then we say that the Father Sun, some say Father Sky. And then our word for the moon is Grandmother Moon. So we literally look at the world as being all of our relations. And then maybe you hear people say that even in Hollywood now, you hear people, if there's a native movie, indigenous movie, and they'll say all my relations in there. And that's what they're talking about are the plants, the fish, the birds, and the animals, as well as all the celestial beings. And that's what and of course all the ancestors and the ones that are the future generations that are yet to come. And so that's what why we say that all of my relations and everyone else when you conclude your prayer. So one of the things they say, of course, is when when he was doing that prayer, then he would talk about facing east, and we say that's where our future generations are coming, or that's the time of children or babies, because the sun is rising, and that's when new beginnings of life is. And then as the sun goes to the south, we say then that's the time of adolescence, and then that's the south down there. And then when we go to the west, we say that's the time of adulthood. And then also when the sun sets, we say beyond that is Jibaye King. And Jibaye King is where our ancestors go. So we think of our path of life from east to west, following the path of the sun. And that we enter this world through the eastern doorway, we say, and we exit through the western doorway, we say. And then in the north, that's where we say the old people are. And then that white snow and the white hair, that's what that reminds us. And then the circle starts all over again. Eh? So, but then when you look at that all around there, you'll see people, sometimes you'll see people addressing, when they're saying a prayer, they'll face those 4 directions. And then they'll actually invoke those different 4 directions, but there's different spirits in each of those directions. And sometimes in different ceremonies, they'll talk about the 8 winds, the ones in between those as well. And then of course, all that's below. And we say there's 4 layers below and 4 layers above the sky as well. So there's a bunch of ways of looking at not only family, but the one fellow that just passed away, his name was Nishike, and that's what he always used to say. I would hear him, I shouldn't say always, but from time to time, I'd go and sit and listen to him at different forums. And then he would say to us, we have a concept called 7 grandfathers. And then he would say, now do you know that those 7 grandfathers for here, meaning this side, now you got to learn it for that side, how you're going to act it, all of that on that side as well. So he had all these different ways of teaching and explaining our worldview about that, and that was what he would try and urge us to make that kind of a connection, eh? Because you know, we talk like this and we say we know it's there and we believe it, but not all of us make it, that connection I'm talking about. So it's only the kind of ones that have worked at it long enough and that are gifted that, then they're able to do that. But it's us looking at all of creation as our family, and then our great uncle, again, the one that I was talking about, Nanabush, who people call a trickster, but we call him our great uncle. Whenever he went around in the stories, the what you call legends, we call Adzokanak, that whenever he went around, he would always address either the partridges or the fisher or whoever he met, he would call them my younger brother. And so he would ask them, he'd say, Nishime, Ani Nishime, hello, my younger sibling, he'd say to them, eh? And then he'd try playing trick on them. And then when they played a trick on him, they got him back, then he would say, ho, Gazazikis, and that means you are older than me. He says, I called you my younger sibling, but actually you are older than me. And that means, in a sense, to us, age. Now, of course, nobody wants to get old. Everyone's putting Botox and getting facelifts and everything else. But to Anishinaabe people, getting old was a real gift and a privilege, and it was actually sought. And a lot of the old traditional prayers were made, may it be that I have a long life, may it be that I get long white hair, and that I may see great grandchildren. But so age had also for us coincided with respect that was accorded you as well.
Alan, it's been humbling listening to you, because the big take home for me is, although Irish is an old language, and it's great that we've been on this island for 4,000 years, it's a farming language. So it's not a hunter-gatherer. The Indo-European culture, you know, developed the growing of grain along the Euphrates River in Persia, and then the tending of cattle. So our culture is as obsessed with the road. The Irish word for road is boher, you know, a cow way. Or it's obsessed with this idea of for the herding. This is not you know, bringing wild buffalo or wild herds of cattle. It's domestic animals, and everything about our world is about this domesticated animals and the domesticated grain and how we were farming those. So although our words for land there's a word for the measurement of land, kulpa, which is the amount of land. It's the grazing unit of land. It's an amount of land that 12 geese would require, or 1 cow would require to feed them. So it's a nicer way of looking at land than acres, which is just about financial value. But it is no way looking at the whole of society. It's basically looking at the world through a early farmer viewpoint. And it just, so, you know, it gives a wider parameter than the modern language. But then when you start talking, I'm just blown off the pitch, basically, the amount of different nuances and layers that are taken into consideration in your philosophy and this language. Now, there's a few questions have come in, and I know we're near out of time, but it's one key question from anonymous attendee, from a forest school teacher in Takaranto, who works at a place. He's keen to teach the children a connection to their place through language. And she asked, we've been discussing whether to learn some Anishinaabe Moan to teach the children about the original actual names of the beings there, but how to do that in a good way, he or she asks. In relation to this, I'm Irish and learning Irish on my own. Does the land want to hear Irish or Ojibwe? I hope, does that make sense? Do you have any answers to him or her.
We used to have there was a poster here, a slogan, and it was the voice of the land is in our language. And so this was a poster developed by the Ojibwe Culture Foundation. Before this, I used to see this when I was a kid, and the painting that went on it was by an artist here in Chigin named Blake DeBosque, and that always stuck with me, that phrase. And then later on in 1992, Ovid McCurdy was the Grand Chief of Assembly of First Nations, and they hosted here a language gathering right in Chiging. And that was also, they took that as the title of the gathering, the voice of the land is in our language. I just want to say one thing. I met a fellow named John Elliott. I forget which nation he is from, but I went to a gathering on Victoria Island out on the BC coast. And they brought a bunch of us Indigenous language activists and language teachers and curriculum developers there. So there are Mi'kmaq people, Mohawk people, and Cree, and quite an array. Anyway, he was the host there, and him and his son and his daughter-in-law. His son and daughter-in-law run their immersion school, and he said, "I want to sing you a song here," he said. And he says, this song, as a welcoming to you, is of that mountain that's outside there. And that mountain has a white top, and that's that old man's hair. And then you'll see that kind of halfway down, looks like a face, and then his beard, the rest of the snow would come down. So he says, this is a song that he gave us a long time ago. And so I want to sing this for you. And so he sang the song, but he says, what I want to tell you is, and I just thought this was so beautiful the way he said it, is our language ties us in sacred ways to our homeland. So our language ties us in sacred ways to our homeland. And to me, that was akin to the voice of the land is in our language. But I just like that idea of the tying our language, that it ties us to this place. And when you said, somebody had asked about whether they want to hear Irish, and of course, I actually do, like you, the more languages we have, the better. I'm a professor at York University now. And last year I asked the students that I had, how many of them is English their second language? And it was the majority. And I said to them, I says, my language here, I'm from this place, I'm Indigenous to this place, and our language is threatened. And I said, but to all of you, I hope that when you get married and you have children, you speak your mother tongue to them and you pass that on to them. I said, we don't need a worldwide monolingual globe. So I think that we do need that. I saw in the chat that they asked why my parents didn't speak Ojibwe to me. My father said to me one time, he says to me one weekend, he just started speaking in Ojibwe to me, and I must have been like 12. He just started speaking Ojibwe to me. Then he looks at me, then he goes, you don't understand me, eh? And I said, no. You didn't understand the word I said, eh? And I said, no. And he says, I should have taught you our language. He says, but they hit me, and they would hit us if we spoke our language. I didn't want you to get hit, and I want you to go far in school. So that's to answer that question. That's why my dad said he didn't teach us our language, because he got hit, and my mom the same way, they got hit. But he regretted it, and now that's my dad's my principal teacher. We speak. My mom passed away 10 years ago, but she was also. I converted him back to speaking to me in Ojibwe. So,
right, it's a powerful thing that somehow these languages. I just know in Ireland, particularly since COVID, in the last 2 years, people seem to be coming back to their language. Like, there was such shame in Ireland about the language. And as I say, we still haven't confronted this idea of having to speak English during the famine, or we wouldn't have survived. So we still have this guilt. We never mention the famine in Ireland. A bit more in North America, the Irish do, but not in Ireland, because we just don't want to think of it. Our only chance, we had to speak. You know, even when I was growing up in 1970s in West Kerry, Irish was the language there, but there was such poverty. So it's a big step to think we can take on one of these languages that we were told we were backward if we spoke it.
Yeah.
But as I said, in the last few years, I do see a revival. People are looking for meaning in their life, but then is it, you know, the value, these springs, well springs of the people who have that language are dying, and there's
Yeah.
we're in a knife edge.
So that when that old man, a different old man, I did my master's, I recorded a fellow named Johnny DeBosque here in Chigging. And that picture that I showed on the first slide on my PowerPoint, and it showed where I told that that was where our culture hero or our great uncle Nanabush dropped his spearhead. Growing up, I knew this place was called Michigan, but when I was growing up, it was called West Bay. And it was called West Bay for a long time. But my parents always said Chigging and others said Chigging. So we just knew that it was still called Chigging. Anyway, but we didn't know what the name meant. And so that old man, when I asked him, what does that mean in Ojibwe? He says, they used to talk about a fella named Nanabush. And he says, and Nanabush was down south, and then he ran all the way up here. And this is, I'm not telling the full story, but anyway, he ends up dropping that spearhead there. And then the old man didn't know. He says, I'm not too sure what that Chigo one is. And the reason he didn't know is that was an archaic word. Because he says, I think it was something with arrows. But the funny thing is, he says, maybe those are arrowheads. He says, he says, they put them on their arrows. So he used the word for arrow. But he says that Chigo one, maybe that was arrowheads. But anyway, I did research and looked in old dictionaries and archival documents. And the Jesuits wrote that this was called the bluff in the shape of a harpoon. And I was like, we're not Inuit or Nishka or any seal hunting or whale hunting people. Anyway, that the actual device is technically a harpoon that he described. It's a bone or a tine of an antler, and they would put barbs on it, and then you would affix a spear handle on it, but you would put a hole in that and you would have a toggle. And so whatever you stabbed with it, it would dislodge itself, and then the spearhead would be in there, and then the rope would go. And then as the animal or the fish tired itself out, then they just reeled that in. So that's what the Michigu is. And like I said, our language is agglutinative. So Michigu is a spearhead, and then Adin refers to a bluff. And so Michigwadnong is the bluff in the shape of the spearhead. And people in Toronto, I always like telling people in Toronto, when I first moved there, I thought spadina was an Italian word. But actually it's a misspelled Ojibwe word, and it's ashpadana. And ashpeming means it's high. Ashpe is the morpheme to indicate height. And adin is again, a ridge or a bluff. So if you ever get to Toronto and you go up to Casaloma, you walk up Spadina Avenue and you get to Casaloma, you'll see that high bluff. And that's what Spadina means, but it's actually ashpadana. Ashpadana means a high ridge. That's what that means. And so that Adina is the same as our name here in Chigging, Chugwadno. So that's where why again, when that man out west in Victoria, BC, when he says, our language ties us in sacred ways to our homeland. To me, when that old man, he didn't know what the Chigo one was, but he knew the story. And then when I learned the story and then I looked up the word, then I found out what that was. And in fact, in an old dictionary written in 1880, the word was in there, Michigu, un dart. And that's meaning the spearhead. And he says, this word, this was written in French, this word is already falling into disuse because the Indians use metal spearheads now instead of bone or antler. So to me, that's the power of the oral tradition, but it also speaks to the duration of our tenure here, how long we've been here, that we have a place here named after a bone harpoon. And that all the people around the Great Lakes knew of this place, and they knew that it was called that Michiquedno. And that's why I latched onto when that fellow says, language ties us in sacred ways to our homeland. So if we know these place names, why they're called that, and then oftentimes they have a story, and that story has a teaching, that's when those are the ties. And that's why our language is so important.
Alan, nothing I can say can beat the profundity of what you've just said there. I'm aware we're slightly over time. I might pass this over to Cheryl to put an end to the evening. But thank you so much, Dr. Corbiere.
Thank you for inviting me. It was a pleasure to meet you all.
I seem to not have my video any longer, but I do have audio. So perhaps I will just carry on. I'll try one more time. But, oh, there we go. Okay, great. Well, what a wonderful, wonderful evening. Thank you, Monica and Dr. Corbiere, really for a most interesting, thoughtful, and moving discussion this evening. You have most definitely given us a lot to reflect upon, and the traffic in the chat box is certainly evidence of that. It is our hope at Canada Ireland Foundation that these cross-cultural discussions can foster greater mutual understanding, appreciation for our respective linguistic traditions, and celebrate the value of diverse cultures and perspectives that exist around the world, but also here in Canada. And I think we would all agree that you have contributed this in spades this evening. On behalf of the board of the Canada Ireland Foundation and all of the attendees joining us this evening, I want to sincerely thank you both for sharing with us your insights on the power of language to convey a unique worldview, and the efforts taken by Indigenous and Irish communities to preserve and indeed revive your endangered but truly treasured languages, and perhaps find opportunities to support one another in that pursuit.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you also to the attendees for joining us this evening. Should you want to see this recording again, this program again, it will be available online tomorrow morning on the Canada Ireland Foundation YouTube channel. So I certainly invite you to take an opportunity to look and listen again. So many great points to ponder. Please be sure to follow the Canada Ireland Foundation on your social media channel of choice, or opt in for our newsletter to stay informed about exciting programming and events we have planned for the coming year, starting in February with Imbolc, a celebration of women. And so with that, I bid you all a good evening and wish you all the very best for the coming holiday season. Good night, all.
Can somebody print out that chat, the questions?
Oh, I do believe
Yeah.
that is possible. I'm going to call upon William to help us with the answer to that question, just to confirm.
I have saved the chat and I will print it out and send it to you. Absolutely.
Okay, lovely, lovely. Thank you all. Very good night.
Okay.
You are, Margaret.